Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox, and I would like to welcome you to the newest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network, From the Editor's Desk, a podcast where myself and Dave Lefort, Editor-in-Chief at Compliance Week, unpack some of the top stories which have or will appear in Compliance Week each month. We look at the top compliance stories, talk some sports, and generally try to solve the world's problems. In this episode, we discuss the Compliance Week survey and articles on the survey inside the mind of the CCO, looking at the gender pay gap, compliance role in ESG, and the compliance role in ransomware and cybersecurity. We take a look at some of the upcoming stories from the ESG Focus in the December magazine and discuss a best practices forum to handle a ransomware attack, which will be presented. I know you'll enjoy this podcast. From the Editor's Desk is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Welcome to another edition of the From the Editor's Desk, a podcast where we unpack some of the top stories which have or will appear in Compliance Week. Look at top compliance stories, talk some sports, and generally try to solve the world's problems. I'm your co-host, Tom Fox.
And I'm Dave Lefort, Managing Director at Compliance Week. Happy to join you here today, Tom, to talk about some of the stories that we've been working on, some of the things that we are working on, and a lot of the things that we're excited about moving forward. So let's get to it.
So what were some of the top stories from Compliance Week in January 2022, Dave?
So it's funny because it's very rare that Compliance Week, a sort of a small B2B, very specific, targeted business journal, essentially. It's very rare that we have a story that goes viral. But earlier this month, we had just that. We had Jacqueline Jaeger wrote a essentially it was an analytical and very well reported piece about the DOJ's investigation into short sellers. And in particular, the DOJ has subpoenaed several hedge funds about the interplay between hedge funds and investment research firms. So essentially, it's the phenomenon of hedge funds deciding to short sell a particular stock and then hiring a research firm to publish a negative report about said stock, so that inevitably, after the report comes out, the hedge fund has already shorted the stock. The report comes out, the stock gets devalued, and the hedge fund's decision to short the stock pays off in a big way. So the investment community has been sort of up in arms about this for a long time, and it hasn't gotten a ton of attention. So the DOJ's decision to look into this and our decision essentially to shine a spotlight on this and say, like, hey, this is long overdue. We gained some fans in the online world of investing. So we went viral in some Reddit forums, and Jacqueline gained a lot of fans. So it was interesting. We had one lawyer commented. He essentially said that he believes that it's the biggest commercial fraud in U.S. history, and it makes the Bernie Madoff scheme look like a gnat on an elephant's behind. That was the direct quote. So I myself, I don't know enough about it to know if it's that big. So he may just be talking, he may be exaggerating for the purpose of emphasis, but it's definitely, it's hit my radar. I know I saw this happen to GE a few years ago, and it's happened to a lot of companies. So companies that have felt targeted for years and investors that have felt shorted for years are sort of, they're seeing a little bit of light here now that the DOJ is actually investigating this. So we'll see how that goes. But it was interesting that story in particular sent our traffic through the roof in ways that we don't normally see, because it caught on in some online communities. The other thing I wanted to call attention to, was this. We sort of have been. I've been talking a lot, and a lot of the industry in general has been talking a lot about ESG gaining momentum, and in particular ESG reporting and setting the SEC is looking at setting a consistent disclosure framework. A couple weeks ago, the BlackRock CEO in his annual letter, of course, BlackRock being the world's largest fund, so obviously the CEO has a lot of influence. So the CEO came out asking companies to set short, medium, long-term targets for greenhouse gas reduction. So essentially, it's calling for all companies to essentially step up and disclose what they're doing to help combat climate change. So that's very much in line with what I think and what we think regulators are moving toward is a mandatory disclosure framework. We think that's what the SEC is up to, and we see that coming in the the not distant future. So it was interesting to see that the BlackRock CEO came out with similar comments. Although equally interesting is BlackRock's stance that they're not totally divesting themselves of all fossil fuel companies. So that's an interesting twist in that story too.
So Dave, I interviewed someone from State Street Global on some of these issues, and he talked about divestiture, and as the way he explained it, State Street wants to engage with the companies they invest in rather than have them divest, because they believe if it's divested, it'll go into the private equity market and there'll be less oversight, less public scrutiny, and that in many ways it doesn't help move the ball forward on climate or carbon neutral, as he phrased it. So that actually when they kind of explain it and really talk about the engagement, that moving from dark brown to light brown is actually a positive, because it allows you then to move to the next step. So I find that very interesting as well. But let me ask you on the short sellers. I saw your piece and I remember that quote from that lawyer. But we've had short sellers who have done, frankly, yeoman's job. I would specifically think of Wirecard. There's a well-known research firm called Muddy Waters, which if you're a blues person,
yes,
you immediately resonate with the name. But there's some very reputable firms, and they're very reputable investors who have who have taken short positions and explained the positions they've taken as well. And so I'm a little, I don't know if concern would be right, but it seems to me there are instances where short sellers do what the market suggests, which is that if you find a problem and you identify it, it allows people like you and me, just investors, to make a decision that, no, I don't want to buy that stock, or if I have it, I want to sell it. So was there any kind of discussion around any positive benefits, if any, of short sellers?
Oh, absolutely. Look, and I don't mean to, give all short selling or all research firms a bad name here. It's just that there is a phenomenon that exists where of essentially, I'll go ahead and just call it bad actors that will do this with intent, and the intent isn't necessarily to shine a spotlight on companies that they believe are not doing the right thing, but rather they see an opportunity to short sell a stock and then hire a research firm to do this work for them without that I would say ethical intent. Like their intent is to make money based on the report, and not to really enact change within the company itself. So that's the phenomenon that I'm talking about here, and that's the thing that the DOJ is looking into. Now, how you identify one from the other is difficult, because any hedge fund that would hire a research firm to write a research report about a stock, they're going to say that they have the best intentions of the investor and of the essentially of the American public, if you will, in mind when they do this. But not all of them are telling the truth. I think it's a matter of and that's why these individuals and these companies were subpoenaed to find out what they can gather in terms of information on what was the motivation behind shorting the stock and hiring the research firm to write the report.
So let's move to articles that are going to come out in February, and I don't want to take your thunder away, but there's a great series that appears next week, beginning January 31st, and I can't wait to read it. So why don't you tell us what's coming?
So we have a case study coming out that is essentially an end-to-end fictional story about a electrical company called Vulnerable Electric that gets hit with a ransomware attack. It's fictional, but it is based on real life events, sort of like ripped from the headlines, if you will, to steal a phrase from Law and Order. Aly McDevitt, our case study writer, she interviewed more than a dozen people, from FBI agents to an ethical hacker to someone with expertise on the dark web, to chief information security officer, to just a general line worker, to I'm just trying to think which among them I've missed. To also, one of the most interesting interviews was with a ransomware negotiator. So there are people who specialize in ransomware negotiations. So essentially, based on all of her interviews, she constructed and also based on what's been in the headlines, and in particular what we saw with the Colonial Pipeline ransomware incident. There's essentially invented a company, Vulnerable Electric, whose systems were hit with a ransomware attack via a phishing attack on essentially a administrative assistant to the head of HR. So it goes through exactly what happens within this organization, and again, it's all based on realistic scenarios and how companies have actually reacted. And the reason we took this approach was because we couldn't get any one company to sort of walk us through the whole process. But, we talked to a lot of companies on background and off the record, and we essentially got a very, very clear view on what is the right way to do this, and what is the wrong way to do this, and what are the opportunities for mistakes that could be made. That's really the takeaway here. Is there are certain points in this, like from day one, when in this story, the employee decides not to reveal right away that she thinks she clicked on a suspicious link, which essentially allowed the ransomware to embed itself into the systems. What was the discussion like around, once it is discovered and they get this, what's called a splash screen, where, the whole company is informed that, hey, we have control of your systems. You need to pay us, I think it's $6 million, whatever the number is, or else we're going to sell all of your employees' data on the dark web. So there are some, very real conversations that take place within the organization. We identify who the stakeholders are at the table, what the considerations are for those stakeholders, and by stakeholders I mean employees, customers, obviously shareholders, and regulators as well. So it's essentially what those conversations are like, what factors are taken into consideration when dealing with such an attack. And then we go through multiple decisions. So we have one scenario where, and I'm not going to give away any spoilers here, but there's one scenario where they decide not to pay the ransom. And there are some very real impacts because of that. And then there's another scenario where they do pay the ransom. And again, there are some very real side effects that come with that as well. So there's the good with the bad in both scenarios. And it gives a very accurate, very real depiction of the risk versus reward of the decision-making process on when a company is hit with a ransomware attack. because you're essentially deciding between the lesser of two evils. And how do you know which is the lesser of the two evils? And it is never an easy decision. And I think that's the ultimate conclusion, is that these are not easy decisions that have to be made, but they often have to be made on a very strict timetable. The hackers are the ones that own the timetable, and they do that for a reason. And they oftentimes know if you have cyber insurance, and they often also know how much cyber insurance you have. So they'll ransomware demand on your level of cyber insurance. So, it's some of the takeaways are, it's always great to have all your information in an old school binder, all of your policies, procedure on what happens when we're hit with a ransomware attack, to have it in paper form, because if you can't access your systems and you don't have it on paper, you're in some trouble. It also helps to run simulations. It also helps to run consistent trainings. And again, there are so many takeaways here from this particular story that are incredibly useful for anyone, really, but especially for people in compliance who have some stake in cybersecurity. We're really excited about this. It's going to launch on I think the beginning of next week over the course of 4 days. It's a 7-part series. We encourage members to it's available to members only, but we're running a special right now. You can get a membership for $199, which is about a third of the regular price, or a little bit more than a third. $199 using the code RNSM199, so short for ransom, RNSM199. You can get access to the full thing. It's going to be coming out in print next month. It'll be available online starting next week. And it's also going to be incorporated into our upcoming virtual event on cyber risk and data privacy. So Aly is going to be interviewing some of the primary sources that she interviewed for the case study during our virtual conference, talking about both the case study and real life situations. So it's sort of a melding of both the case study and sort of a follow-up, if you will, on with some of her primary sources. So we're super excited about this.
That sounds great, Dave. Anything else upcoming you could tell us about?
Yeah. So after that, the next big thing really that's on our radar is we're going to have a shorter form case study on, like, obviously ESG is an extremely hot topic right now. We just talked about it earlier. And what we're doing is we thought it would be useful to spotlight and take a really in-depth look at what one company is doing from top to bottom on ESG. And we decided to look at FedEx. FedEx has been sort of a leader in the space, and I think how I would describe it is they've sort of shown a best practices method for establishing benchmarks, reachable benchmarks, and not getting the right stakeholders in the room and then messaging stakeholders in the right way. So we'll have that is going to be probably late February or early March. That's going to come out on complianceweek.com. And in conjunction, we are also developing a module learning on sort of I won't call it ESG for dummies, but ESG for practitioners who aren't otherwise versed in ESG. So sort of like a ESG primer, if you will. So those will be coming out simultaneously around the end of February or the beginning of March.
Now, Dave, I'd like to turn to the upcoming Compliance Week 2022 conference. Where are we on that? And can you give us any updates on any of the attendees or events around that?
Again, we are planning, we're all systems go for an in-person event for the first time in 3 years, May 16th through 18th at the JW Marriott in Washington, D.C., our national conference. We actually just in this last week, we booked our I guess what I would call our keynote our keynote conversation. So we're going to have two SEC commissioners. We're going to have Allison Heron-Lee and Hester Peirce on the stage at the same time, having a conversation about discussing the SEC's priorities for the upcoming year. Also, these are two commissioners, as you know, they've got opposite stances on many issues. So it's going to be really fun to see the back and forth between these two on the same stage. Talking ESG, talking crypto, talking CCO liability. So there's going to be a lot of topics that will be on the table. And, a really great part of this too is that there's going to be a opportunity for a Q&A with both of them as part of this session, so that the practitioners in the audience will actually get to have their questions answered by one of these two SEC commissioners. So we are grateful to the SEC for agreeing to this, and we are super excited about having, in particular, this session, but overall having our in-person event, again, live in DC, first time in 3 years in May. Again, knock on wood, that there are no more variants of interest that pop up between now and then in terms of COVID. So we're pretty excited about that.
Well, speaking for the Compliance Week 2022 conference audience, there's a lot of excitement, Dave, and a lot of people are talking about, this is the first full conference since the pandemic, and a lot of people want to come for that reason. So I think you're really well positioned with presentations like this one of the two SEC commissioners and your new venue to really just be as over the top as Compliance Week has ever been. And I'm certainly looking forward to that as well. Now let's see if we can save the world a little bit and talk some sports, because we've had some pretty big sports news recently. And I want to start off with what I thought was the greatest weekend of playoff football I had ever seen. All four games, the first three games were decided on the last play, and that's before we got to what I think was perhaps the best playoff game I've ever seen, which was the last game of Buffalo and Kansas City. What were your kind of thoughts, really not having the Patriots in the playoffs, me not having the Cowboys in the playoffs? It made it actually more enjoyable because I didn't have to care. I could just enjoy. So what did you think when you watched this weekend's games?
Yeah, I'm with you. It was just terrific. The fact that all four games came down, either, three of them were decided on last second field goals. One of them was decided in overtime after 25 points scored in the final 2 minutes of the game. I'm with you. This was the best full slate of NFL playoff games that I have ever seen. And again, this didn't include either one of our teams, so I didn't have any rooting interest. I just wanted to see quality football, and it was fantastic. But my big takeaway was the Bucs and the Rams, and the takeaway there. Brady was down again. 20. I think it was 27 to 3, if I'm not wrong. Brought the Bucs all the way back, and in the last minute, the only thing that was preventing that game from going to overtime was exactly what happened. Was a deep Sam Bradford pass to Cooper Kupp, of all people. The most predictable thing in the world is what happened. And then when you look after the game, Bruce Arians, the Tampa coach, is talking about, you know what, we blitzed on that play, but there was some missed. I think he identified one player individually, called someone out. I forget who it was. Missed the call there, or missed the read, or so it's not a great look for Bruce Arians, not a great look for the Bucs, and I think all of this leads to Tom Brady, and whether is he done with the NFL. Like, it's disappointing to see him out of the playoffs at this stage, because I really thought the Bucs were going to win that game. I from seeing Tom Brady the last 20 years in New England, down 27 to 3. That's nothing. We've seen that several times, including in the Super Bowl, the Brady come back from that. But the way that game ended with such a blunder on the Bucks' part, I think that Brady is. I think he's done with the Bucks. To be honest, I think the some of the things that he's said in the aftermath of that game, talking about his family, and then there was even one interview that I heard where I think his daughter was in the background, and you could hear her talking in the background and talking about how he's got to consider what his family wants at this point, and he's 44 years old, and is so here's what I think. I don't think he's playing for the Bucks. Like, I think that the Bucks have a lot of cap problems. Gronk has talked about retiring. Bruce Arians, I mean, if it were me, I'd fire him. I don't think he and Brady get along very well. So if you're Tom Brady, do you decide then to go to yet another team for a shot at one more title, or do you decide, you know what, this is it, I'm done here. I've proved my point. I proved that I could win a Super Bowl without the Patriots. And now it's time to spend time with my family and, oh, by the way, grow my TB12 business. So that was my biggest takeaway. I am looking forward to this weekend's games as well, but I think there's no arguing that last weekend was just tremendous entertainment. If you're a fan of anything sports, I mean, that was just, you couldn't ask for anything more.
So I don't know if it's Freudian slip or other, but you actually called Matthew Stafford the quarterback of the Rams, Sam Bradford. Maybe it's just a throwback.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Yes, that was, yes. Did I say Bradford? Oh, God, Bradford hasn't been in the league for a couple of years now.
But it wasn't Sam Bradford. It was Matthew Stafford. So we're going to have to separately talk about the Kansas City Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills, but mine was the Bengals. Perhaps the most, other than the Detroit Lions, long-suffering franchise in pro football. Have never won a Super Bowl. They've been to 2 Super Bowls. The Lions won NFL championships before there was the Super Bowl era. So for the Cincinnati fans, I certainly felt their excitement. But the thing that struck me about that game, Dave, was that it once again shows you the level of quality in the playoffs, and that you don't have to play a perfect game, but you have to play a mistake-free game. And Tennessee went into that game a 7-point favorite, playing at home, number 1 seed, had a week off, and made some glaring basic mistakes, 3 fumbles. And they allowed Cincinnati to hang around and win the game. And that's, to me, really pro football, that it's so close between teams that you, like I said, you don't have to be perfect because no one's perfect, but you have to be mistake-free. But we have to talk about Kansas City and Buffalo. 25 points, 2 minutes, 13, as one of my podcasts was entitled, How Long Does It Take to Win an NFL Game? Well, we know the answer now, 13 seconds. I don't think anyone in America, except perhaps Patrick Holmes, thought they could tie that game. But they did. But Josh Allen played as fine a game as you could ever ask a quarterback to play. And unfortunately, there had to be a loser. But for pure excitement, I have not ever seen a playoff game. I think the Patriots win over the Falcons was probably more exciting Super Bowl win for me because they were down, as you noted, 28-3. But that was the shootout of shootouts. The defensive guys, I was the defensive guy in football, and they were just gassed. I mean, they were out on the field and they were trying, but they had nothing left. And you talked about Cooper Kupp and outrunning, was it a 65-yard pass that Matthew Stafford threw to him for them. And but the Bills and the Chiefs was I just can't say enough about that game. It was and once again showing Sean Payton. I think they'll debate forever, should he have squib kicked it or not? Turns out he should have. But what if they'd squib kicked it and something would have happened? You know, then they said, see, that's why you always kick it out of the end zone and make them go 80 yards in 13 seconds. Because, of course, nobody can do that. except we know that's not true. So were you just on the edge of your seat for that game, or how did you feel about that game?
Yeah, I was in the same boat as you. I thought it was incredible. These are two quarterbacks, and keep in mind too, Josh Allen. This from the context of my viewing experience, the last two times so the Bills beat the Patriots the week before. They had 7 possessions. I think it was 7 possessions, 7 touchdowns. Patriots never stopped them. It was the Josh Allen show. The previous time the Patriots played the Bills, same thing. There were 0 possessions in which the Bills did not score. So, and then after the playoff game, it was noted afterwards that Bill Belichick went to the Bills locker room to express to Josh Allen, like, hey man, you played a perfect game. I gotta give you your kudos here. So I mean, my takeaway was that, one, I don't think the Patriots are going to be in contention for an AFC title anytime soon because we have 2 quarterbacks in Mahomes and Allen who are still in their, I think, mid-20s. And 2 is I'm just excited to see them play again. I think the Bills and the Chiefs and possibly the Bengals within the next 2 to 3 years, this is going to be an every year thing where these are unstoppable offenses with quarterbacks who they're not pocket passers. Once you get out of the pocket, you can't really game plan around that. And I think that's that. You saw the last 2 minutes of that game just showed you essentially, yes, the defenses were gassed, but you also can't game plan around a quarterback's athleticism and just pure ability. Like the week before that, Josh Allen had, I think it was 9 seconds to throw because he scrambled so far out of the pocket against the Patriots, threw the ball. He essentially, after the game, acknowledged he was throwing it away, but he threw it to the back of the end zone, and the Bills' tight end, Knox, caught it for a touchdown on the back of the end zone. It looked incredible. It looked intentional. But after the game, he said, "Oh yeah, I was throwing that ball away." It's like, "Oh, come on, man!" Even when he's throwing it away, he's making the right decision. So early in his career, Josh Allen showed that immaturity. He was very immature. He made a lot of mistakes, but he always had the talent. Now he's sort of combining the experience with the talent, and he and Patrick Mahomes. I think we're going to see this matchup for at least the next 4 or 5 years in the playoffs, and I'm all for it. Like I don't think I'm a fan of what the Patriots are doing, but I don't see a scenario in which they're up to that level anytime soon. And again, you might want to throw the Bengals in there too, because they've got a young quarterback and they've got at least two young stud receivers, great running back. They've got all the pieces to make a consistent playoff run. Having gone, what was it, 30 years. Am I doing that math right? Yeah, 30 years between playoff victories. So, just excited. Yeah, I'm with you that Mahomes and Allen is going to be a matchup to watch for years to come. Is it going to be the next Brady Manning? Maybe. Yeah.
I'd like to now turn to the Hall of Fame because we had a couple of significant developments. Obviously, David Ortiz, Big Papi, elected to the Hall of Fame, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. We also had Barry Bonds and Roger Clements were denied entry into the Hall of Fame for the 10th year. So that's it for them. But I want to start with David Ortiz. So I wanted to have you as a Boston sports guy, both a writer and fan. What did David Ortiz mean to not just the Red Sox, but the city, and then his role as a designated hitter and how great he was to make the Hall of Fame as the second designated hitter, full-time designated hitter. So tell us about Big Papi.
He essentially, if you think back to the late 60s, that 1967 Red Sox team with Yaz, they call it the impossible dream. That team didn't win the World Series, but it reignited the interest in baseball in Boston. I won't say that Ortiz had the same impact, but it was similar. But you really have to go back to the 2003 season when the Red Sox fell just short of the World Series. They lost the Yankees in 7 games in the ALCS. Then 04 was obviously their big breakthrough, and Ortiz was a huge part of that. Ortiz was a huge part of anything. I think I was working at the Boston Globe for a lot of those years and covering those teams. And I remember we had a running photo gallery of all of David Ortiz's walk-off hits, and it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And it was incredible the way, I think in particular, he was such an outsized personality. So he was somebody that you could relate to. He laughed at he laughed at himself. He laughed at his teammates. You could see that he was having fun, and he came through. It seemed like almost every time when it mattered the most. It was electric. When he was up in any big spot at Fenway, it was an electric atmosphere. Whether you were there or you were watching it at home, you were getting goosebumps just watching it. I still remember I was actually not at the game, the ALCS game, I believe, 2013 against the Tigers, when he hit the grand slam that tied the game. And there's that famous photo of Torrey Hunter with his legs over the wall and the cop in the bullpen with his arms up. So that was, that was Ortiz. Like that's Ortiz in a moment right there. And then, that same year was the year of the, it might have been, that was the year of the Boston Marathon bombings too. So that was, and I remember the first game after the bombings, it was Ortiz who came out of the dugout right before the game when they were honoring the first responders and said, like, this is our bleeping city and no one's going to take that from us. So that was another defining moment that really made him bigger than baseball for Bostonians.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is you talked about 2013, and it was certainly memorable, but you also talked about 2004. And what that really emphasized is the longevity of his career. It was, you will probably never forget 04 because it took the monkey off your back forever. And then you won 2 more after that. So you've got several now, and, nothing can take the place of having 3, but nothing probably will ever take the place of 04 for you guys, and what that meant to not only every Bostonian, but every New Englander. And that's really what I remember as the first time I really focused on him was 04. But he had a great, long career. And to do what he did in 2013, after having come up at the first part of actually in the 90s, really spoke to him. The other thing that I got to know him through is after he retired and became a commentator, particularly in the World Series games. So I got to see Houston in 3 World Series where he is part of the post-game show. And English is not his first language, so sometimes he struggles a little bit. But what he talks about is not the analytics, but from the heart. And every comment he makes, he talks about the batter's heart or the batter's head, and the same with pitchers, and how you have to manage to the heart and head. And what struck me about those comments is that it seemed to me that's the real David Ortiz. And if he was like that in the dugout, it really talked about why he was such a leader in the dugout and why he was such a leader for, 10 plus years on the Red Sox. So I thought it was a great selection and the election, and certainly well-deserved. And he, I think, has even grown more now because we see him on the national stage communicating with us in a way he obviously didn't when he was a player as a color commentator. So a great shout out to David Ortiz. Let's end with Clements and Bonds, and a lot of discussion around whether or not they should have been disqualified. Obviously, Boston columnist Dan Shaughnessy made his thoughts on that very clear, unfortunately, in the context of David Ortiz, and took a few shots for that. But does this maybe put the end on the steroid era? Are we going to be debating this literally forever, Dave?
Yeah, I think it's problematic. The problematic part of all of this is the fact that that the baseball writers are voting on this, and that there's a clause that that they're sort of required to consider about a player's character, and that calls into and that sort of brings into play: do we want to disqualify player X from being considered for the Hall because they took performance enhancing drugs? So I'm of the opinion that you like we can probably say with great certitude that Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, they cheated. They took performance enhancing drugs. But and then there are other people for whom we can say we're fairly confident, and there are others that would say we don't really think so, but we don't really know. So I'm of the opinion that you judge a player on what he did on the field, and you put a plaque up in the Hall of Fame that says all the players in this wing, this was the steroid era of baseball, and you sort of like if it's truly a museum, you sort of aren't you obligated to tell the history of the game? And the steroid era is a big part of the history of the game, and if it's a museum, then in your the idea is to give an accurate depiction of these were the biggest things happening in the game. These were the biggest players of this era. Then that's where they belong, asterisk or not. But you do it in a way that acknowledges the era that they played in. I think that's the way to do it. But the way that it is currently voted on it's problematic because in the defense of baseball writers, they take this. I mean, I know for a fact they take this very seriously, and perhaps I don't know, to a degree that's maybe a little bit too. I don't know if too serious is the right word, but they probably take it probably too literally. I think I want to say, and as a result, then there are these. There are some of the greatest players to ever play the game won't be in the museum that's dedicated to the baseball history, and that's not. I don't think that's the right. I don't think that's the right result that we're looking for as fans of baseball. So that's my take on that. I don't have the solution, but that's my take.
Well, Dave, as always, it's been a ton of fun. I wanted to thank you again, and I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation. I am Tom Fox.
Thank you, Tom. I'm Dave Lefort. It's been fun talking. I can't wait to do it next month.
This is Tom Fox again. Thank you for listening to this episode of From the Editor's Desk. I've linked to several Compliance Week features in the show notes. First of all, the promo they're running for their annual membership, dropping the price down to $199, and information on Compliance Week 2022. I hope you will join Dave and I again for another podcast at the end of February where we look at some of the articles from February and take a look at March in Compliance Week. Thanks again for listening. If you are interested in how ESG intersects with compliance, check out my new podcast, The ESG Report, also appearing on the Compliance Podcast Network.